Welcome to this guide all about how to read from Mrs. Rose, Head Librarian at the King's School, Canterbury. Now, let me just clarify what this guide is all about, because I'm sure you all know how to read. But I think we can all agree that there's a difference between reading for leisure and enjoyment and reading more difficult texts at school. But when you read these more difficult texts, do you read differently? Or do you read them in exactly the same way you would read anything else? Have you ever considered that you might benefit from applying a different reading approach to this difficult reading material? Well, I'm here to offer some suggestions on this topic. This guide draws on some really helpful tips from a book by Daniel Willingham called Outsmart Your Brain, published in February 2023. When we read an easy novel, or a comic for example, the author weaves an interesting story around some key moments. The narrative has usually been edited down to a select number of details, enough for you to grasp the plot and main themes, but not so much as to detract from the story itself. And typically, although not always, the narrative is presented to you in a rather sensible, straightforward manner. The story develops as you read more sentences. One thing follows another in a simple, linear sequence. Our brains like this kind of reading. It's easy, it's enjoyable, it's familiar because it's the way we're taught to read as children, and importantly, for our brains, it's low effort. Textbooks, however, don't follow this same template. Information's presented to you hierarchically. And so you, the reader, have to construct and coordinate the story you're seeking across sentences, building the narrative, so to speak, by connecting what you're reading now with something you perhaps read a few pages ago. This is an entirely different process for your brain to undertake and is not so simple as reading A to B to C. This is why you can rarely read a textbook from cover to cover in sequence and have understood all the information when you get to the end. So what you need to be doing, if you want to maximise your reading skills, is to apply different strategies depending on the kind of material you're reading. So what strategies for reading can be useful when reading difficult texts? Well, to start with, don't do what everyone does, which is just read and highlight. It's a really common approach when reading for information. However, it's a really bad approach when you consider the type of information we're reading and the way that our brains like to read. So what we typically do, unfortunately, if we don't know any better, is we read, and when we get to something that seems important, out comes the highlighter pen. We think that by highlighting it, we're fixing it in our brain and we're creating a visual aid to memory on the page itself. But have you ever come back to a book and looked at your highlighting and found that most of it is not useful at all? That's probably because you don't know what's important when you start reading it. You haven't built your understanding of the topic yet, and you're also probably not reading with a specific question in mind. When reading a text for the first time, unless you're already an expert in the field of study you're reading, this approach is not going to get you very far at all. Consider this. Researchers went to a college bookshop and bought 10 used copies of the same course textbook. Now, if spotting the most important content was easy, everyone should have highlighted the same material. But the researchers found very little overlap in what students had highlighted. With difficult texts, you need to have a framework or a comprehensive understanding of the topic already to guide your reading and aid understanding as you go. The second thing we can do is read with context and purpose. Survey the text first. We sometimes call this pre-reading. Read the headline, the subheadings, note any bullet points, read any summary boxes to get a rough idea of what the author is going to tell you about. That way, you'll have an idea of context when you're reading the details. Pose some questions about what you expect to learn. For example, if you see the heading Mars' Contribution to the Philosophy of Science, the obvious question to ask is, what was Mars' contribution to the philosophy of science? Keep in mind the rough idea of what you think the text might be about that you gained when surveying the text, when you actually read the text. Look for information that answers the questions you've posed. Reading in this way helps you to build meaning across sentences. When you've read a section, summarise it, as if you were explaining it to someone else. You can do this with note-taking, written audio or visual, and there are library guides to note-taking should you want to find out more about that. It can be really easy to think that you've understood what you've read once you've read it, but having to reword and explain it to someone else, albeit maybe an imaginary someone else, not only confirms if you've understood it or not, but it's also a great way to fix that information more securely in your mind. Now, if you're the kind of person who just reads and forgets to apply these strategies, it might be helpful to pop some post-it notes at the end of different sections of text as a visual reminder to stop and summarise. And finally, allow yourself time to read and to think and to read again. Firstly, I think it's important to say here that speed reading is not a thing. We have a library guide on that, but attempting what people typically think of as speed reading will not improve the quality or quantity of your learning information from a text. You must allocate time, more time than you may currently think, to read. To go back to pre-reading, reading the headings and the summary boxes in your textbook, do not mistakenly believe that pre-reading means you can skip the actual reading. Using these reading aids that you commonly find in textbooks has been proven in research to be a really successful reading strategy, but only if you also do the reading. These strategies should supplement your reading, not help you avoid your reading. Yes, it's difficult and time-consuming, but that's just the way it is. There are no shortcuts here, and that's for a reason. Google recently did some user behaviour studies, and they found that the quicker and easier someone gained an answer to their question, the lazier and dumber their brain became. Your brain is like a muscle. The right kind of effort, the right workout strategies, lead inevitably to good results. If you consistently work your arm muscles correctly in the gym, you'll be able to lift heavier loads. The same goes for your brain. The more you work out your brain, the easier it will be to lift those loads, and the more complex, heavier loads you'll be able to deal with in the future. So I hope this brief introduction to reading has been helpful. For more on this and related topics, visit the library SharePoint area at bit.ly/kings-library. Or for those of you who are not King's staff or pupils, check out our other YouTube guides on our channel at King's School Library. And if you enjoyed this short video, please do like, share or subscribe.